Toth is serving a 25-year sentence at this federal prison. We spoke with him about his web of deception and how he stayed one step ahead of law enforcement for so long.
Someone who is really a predator.
This is somebody who's beyond looking at images. This is somebody who's created images.
You knew the FBI was looking for you.
Yes.
But why didn't you turn yourself in?
At first it was kind of a game. There was a certain element of, you know, I'm running for my life. It was almost like a long-term adrenaline high.
The game ended for Eric Toth, now an inmate at the federal prison in Petersburg, Virginia. But he's long been a prisoner of a mental disorder he says he can't control.
My prosecutor said I'm not a monster, I'm just a seriously disturbed individual, and sometimes I find myself agreeing with him.
The 32-year-old former teacher is a pedophile who told us his victims were all boys he loved to obsession.
Toth was an extremely dangerous individual.
For 3 years, Toth taught at Washington, D.C.'s Beauvoir, the National Cathedral Elementary School.
Well, honestly, I don't know exactly how many victims there were. The court record said 17.
Court records and interviews reveal that in June of 2008, a fellow Beauvoir teacher discovered a school-owned digital camera with sexually explicit photographs and videos of children. It was quickly traced to Toth. So you do believe taking sexually explicit photos of children is wrong?
Yes, certainly taking sexually explicit photos of anybody without their permission is wrong.
Court records further indicate that Toth had installed hidden cameras inside air fresheners that he placed in school bathrooms.
I've made some horrible choices that have hurt people, and I've also made some choices that have helped people and helped the world.
He had skills which he developed as a counselor, as a tutor, that he utilized to gain the trust of parents, and then he capitalized on that to exploit the children that he was entrusted to guide.
When the pornographic images were discovered at Beauvoir, Toth was immediately escorted off campus and soon began a life on the run.
I definitely do regret my actions and feel sorry about them.
FBI accounts and letters to us detail an astonishing itinerary from Washington, D.C. to Indiana, where he grew up. After a brief stay, he traveled to Chicago, Madison, Wisconsin, and Minneapolis, where he abandoned his car at the airport, leaving behind a suicide note and a thumb drive containing child pornography. From there, he took a bus to Billings, Montana, where he lived in a rescue mission for a month. In July of 2008, he traveled to Wyoming and then hitched a ride back to Montana. Soon, he was on the road again to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, O'Brien, Oregon, and on to Phoenix, where he became a full-time live-in volunteer at a homeless shelter. Twice, Toth's case was featured on America's Most Wanted. After the second broadcast, someone recognized him, but he told us he intercepted an email warning the shelter he was a fugitive. From there, he took a bus to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and with a newfound friend, he headed to Dallas and then Austin, where he would work for 3 years in the computer industry.
An alleged child pornographer is...
In April of 2012, Eric Toth became the first pedophile on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, taking the spot that had been occupied by Osama bin Laden. That, he told us, prompted him to make plans to leave the country.
I felt horrible. Actually, I felt as if I'd been kicked in the gut and that all the breath had left me. I actually curled up in bed and essentially didn't do anything for several days.
But for Toth, escaping arrest quickly became an adrenaline-filled cat and mouse game. And the law came incredibly close. In April of 2012, Toth says he was on a bus from Arkansas to Texas that was pulled over by Texas state troopers, who asked all the passengers for their identification. Toth thought the game was over. They looked at his fake ID and moved on. And in August of 2013, Toth obtained a fraudulent passport in Houston, photoshopping his own picture and even removing his distinctive facial mole. He says to defy facial recognition software. He had his visa and passport expedited, claiming he was visiting Nicaragua to tend to an ill relative. He would later return briefly to the United States, ironically, to get documents for Nicaraguan citizenship validated at the consulate in South Florida. He then returned to Central America. Months later, Toth was captured in Nicaragua, where he told us he'd married a hotel maid to gain citizenship. He'd been turned in by an American who recognized him.
The police have been very professional. Thank you.
To what extent do you believe doing what you were convicted of is harmful to children?
Harm is an interesting word.
Toth grew up in a middle-class Midwestern family. At the age of 10 or 11, he realized he was attracted to young boys and could never tell anyone. In candid, graphic letters to us, Toth wrote, "When you have to lie about who you are every day, lying, manipulating, portraying a false you, etc., becomes pretty easy." To what extent are you sorry for what you did, or are you simply sorry you got caught?
Well, I mean, I would be absolutely lying if I didn't say that pretty much any criminal is sorry that they get caught. You know, the consequences aren't fun to deal with.
In his letters, Toth cites academic studies claiming that sexual contact between an adult and a child is not necessarily harmful.
That's correct. There is research that suggests that while it absolutely can be and frequently is harmful, that it does not have to be harmful. In a couple of studies in particular, they said the issue of willingness was central.
But experts say children cannot consent to any type of sexual activity with an adult.
Is a traumatic experience.
Dr. Allison Jackson says child abuse doesn't need to involve physical trauma to cause long-term harm.
Emotional scars and the emotional injury is usually the larger baggage that gets carried on for a lifetime.
You know, I have this dark thing lurking in me that unfortunately is not easy to control.
Pediphilia is classified as a mental disorder, one for which experts say there is no cure and little to no effective treatment.
As a pedophile, I have kind of a dark inner secret that I have to deal with, and that unfortunately my efforts in dealing with it haven't always been effective.
When he's released, Eric Toth will be 52 years old. He faces a lifetime of supervision and is barred from any contact with children.